So for a studio, on average, you're looking at £1,000 a month. When I say studio, I mean studio. Electricity, gas, water, Wi-Fi. Those are your main ones. Notting Hill is one of my favourite areas of London, so naturally I gravitated towards here. So in terms of rent, my rent is... Hi again, welcome back. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Tati. Today's video is all about living in London, renting in London, the apartment hunting process, and everything to do with that. So let's just get straight in. Alright, so I asked you guys over my Instagram to send me questions relating to, renting, apartment hunting, all of that sort of stuff. Because if you don't know, I just moved into my first studio in London. So yeah, I kind of collated all the questions and have broken it down into different sections in hopes of answering all of the questions easily. So I'm going to be as transparent as possible, go over prices, locations, websites, everything to do with costs, hidden costs, all the details to do with my place, and then kind of an overview of the whole process from start to finish. My experience, my advice, my tips and tricks, and all the steps that you need to take and that I have taken to secure a property in London. I say that as if I've bought this place. Just to be clear, I have not bought this place. Hopefully sometime soon I'll buy somewhere. This is just from my perspective of renting in London. So yeah, that's basically a little rundown of what this video is going to be. So let's start with section number 1, location. So with all of these points, I'll talk about it from a general perspective and then my perspective also. When it comes to location, the number one question you need to ask yourself is, what is your main reason for moving to London? So for example, for me, I moved because I'm doing a master's degree and I wanted to live close to my university. So for you, is that you just want to live in London, or are you going to be working in London? That sort of stuff. That way you can decide what area of London you want to live in, whether that's east, west, north or south, and then you can narrow it down from there to the borough. If you don't have a specific reason like university or work for moving to London, then your choices are kind of a bit more broad, I guess, because you're not limited to one area. For me, I'm going to King's College London. My campus is in West London, so it was a no-brainer that I was moving to West London. But obviously there are different factors that go into that. Different costs. West London tends to be a more expensive place. For me, I would rather live closer, have a shorter commute, and have travel be cheaper than live further out and have to pay more for travel and be spending most of my time traveling. But I'll get into the costs and all of that later. As I said, you've got west, east, north, south. Each part of London is very different, so just do some research. I think if you're living alone for the first time, definitely prioritize safety, whether it's in the sense of you're moving to a building where there's other people or you're in a safer neighborhood. I personally researched all of those things, like crime rates, how quiet the neighborhood is, all of that sort of stuff. So that's my advice when it comes to choosing a location. So moving on, the actual hunting process. How do you go about finding all of these places? Whether you want a studio, 1-bed, 2-bed, and you've decided on your location, then you can go ahead and start with a general website search. So in general, I'd say use websites like Rightmove and Zoopla, but if you're a student, you can use websites like Hello Student, Spotter Home, Uni Places, and On the Market. Those are all the places that I search the most, and that way when you're using those websites, they can provide external links to the estate agents or private landlords that will be owning that property. And then also you have the dilemma of choosing between whether you want to go with an agency or private landlord. Some agencies have agency fees, as we all know, which are very annoying, but in London it does sometimes give you access to properties that aren't available to everyone. I personally paid a membership fee to an estate agent, and that gave me access to a list of properties that weren't available on Rightmove. So there's different methods that you could go about. Personally, I wouldn't suggest going the route that I did and paying an extra fee. I paid £70 to join this agency, which meant I had to find a property with them because I wasn't letting that £70 go to waste. But on the pro side, you have access to a bunch of properties that other people don't have access to if they're not members, which I think is really good, especially because of how competitive the London renting scene is. It's so unbelievably competitive, so I just wanted to make it a bit easier for myself. But that does come at an extra cost. Another reason why I think the way I did it is a con. I would never, ever, ever recommend them to absolutely anyone. The chances of you finding my agency and renting with them is very low. And just to make sure, check the Google reviews. If there's nothing by me, you're safe. But yeah, let's move on to costs. It's no secret that renting in London is a very expensive activity. It obviously depends on the location. So Zone 1, which is the closest you can get to central London. So for a studio, on average, you're looking at £1,000 a month. When I say studio, I mean studio. I viewed some studios in Zone 1 where they were £1,000 a month, maybe a tiny bit more, very run down. The shower would be right next to the stove. It's like not a place that you'd actually really want to be. 1,000 to 1,100 for a decent studio in Zone 1, and Zone 2 probably around 1,000, and then as you go out into Greater London, it's a bit cheaper. You can get an average of maybe £750 for a studio. That is further out, and then that cost could be offset by your travel expenses depending on how often you go into central London, which is why I was saying earlier, sometimes it's worth paying more to live closer if you're going to be traveling every day to work or every day to uni, for example, because travel would be cheaper. But if you're not traveling every day and you're not going into central every day, then it definitely works out cheaper to live further out. Even though it's more expensive to travel in from further out, you're not traveling in as often, if that makes sense. So yeah, in relation to studios, those are the average prices. Obviously, as you go up in size, the price increases. So maybe for a 1/2 bed, you're looking at 1,200 on average, 3 bed, maybe 1.3, and it keeps going up like that. And if you're doing a house share, prices will definitely be much cheaper than that. So for example, as I said, a 2 bed, maybe 1,200, and if you're sharing that, that's like 600 each. So it works out cheaper if you share with people, but it just depends on what you want to do. For me, I was hell-bent on living alone because I really didn't enjoy my last year of living with people. I just needed my space, and most importantly, quiet. So it just depends. It'll definitely cost more to live alone and cheaper to live with people. So I've mentioned rent, but there are obviously other costs. So you've got your bills, for example, council tax, which if you're a student, you don't have to pay. So definitely appeal that if you get sent a letter in the post. Electricity, gas, water, Wi-Fi. Those are your main ones. Now, you might be able to find a property that has some bills included. That's what I did. So with my property, I've got electricity, gas, and water included, which I love. So I only had to sort out Wi-Fi. It takes 2 weeks to get Wi-Fi set up, so highly recommend doing that before you move in if you need it urgently. As I said before, if you're going with an agency, you'll have agency fees. For me, that was £70, and then you'll have your deposits as well. So some properties will ask for a non-refundable deposit, and whether your application is approved or not, that money is theirs. And then you might have another deposit on top of that, depending on the estate agent, the landlord, whoever it is. So definitely set aside some money for that, because that first month of moving into a new place, you will be spending a lot of money on those type of fees, setup costs, all of that. So for me, I had a deposit of £200, which was then put towards my first month's rent. Alright, so next let's talk about my property. If you haven't already seen my empty studio apartment tour, I'll link it down below. A fully furnished studio tour will be coming soon, so definitely keep an eye out for that, because I'm so excited for you guys to see how I've decorated this space. But anyway, let's talk about the logistics of this place and how I went about applying and securing this property. So in terms of my location, I'm in Notting Hill, which is West London and Zone 1. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to King's College, London. So my priority was just living somewhere that was very close. Notting Hill is one of my favorite areas of London, so naturally I gravitated towards here. But I viewed places all around West London. As I said, I used an agency, which I found on Rightmove, and then paid a membership of £70 to £80 to apply for viewings and also apply for the apartments themselves. I had to pay that membership fee in order to come view the property in person, which was a big risk because I could have turned up and hated them. But for me, the location was absolutely perfect and I was willing to risk it. I did get very lucky because I saw, I believe, 4 properties with this agency, hated 3 of them and loved this one. Well, I say hated, I just wasn't very fond of them, which when you're searching for somewhere to live, you need to love it. Just be patient, keep searching, you'll find somewhere you love. I was under the impression that it would take maybe going to 1 day of viewings and I'd find the place. Very wrong. It takes people months and months and months to find somewhere. Obviously in London, the process is a bit quicker because it's very competitive, but yeah, just be patient. So I found this place. I went to the viewing on a Thursday. I decided I wanted it and came back to London to apply on the Friday, paid a deposit, and then on the Monday came back again and paid first month's rent. So it was a very fast process, and the only reason it took as long as it did, that was kind of like 5 days. It would have been 3 if the weekend wasn't there. So luckily for me, the weekend was there. but yeah, very fast as you can see. So in terms of rent, my rent is £1,083 a month, and that includes electricity, gas and water, which I think is a really good deal. My budget was £1,000 a month, but obviously with those bills included that I would have had to pay anyway, I think it's a really good deal, and it just saves the hassle of me having to call British Gas or do whatever it is I need to do to sort out those bills. So I only really had to set up my Wi-Fi, which is not really an expensive bill anyway. So I was really happy with this, but it wasn't as easy as just paying that first month's rent and moving in, because there are so many checks that have to happen after that. So for example, proving that I'm a student, getting a guarantor, which I'll talk about in a sec, and just having all of those documents approved, that took like another month in itself, and I'll talk about why in a sec. So yeah, let's move on to the overall process from start to finish, from wanting to move and searching to moving in and decorating. So as I've mentioned, you come up with the idea that you want to move to London. You think about your location, you look online, you book viewings. And when you're preparing to book viewings, my one tip would be try book a bunch of viewings on one day in the same area. Maybe do West London one day, East London a different day, South a different day, North a different day. If you're not sure about what area it is that you want to move, if you're sure, then work in different boroughs. That way you don't have to be traveling all over London in order to go to these viewings, and you can view more places in a shorter period of time, basically. And when you go to viewings, don't be scared to ask questions. These estate agents, it's their job to sell you this property and to get you to rent this property. So they're only going to highlight the property's best parts. It's your job to ask all the questions. Make sure, are you getting enough natural light? Are the windows double glazed? Those sorts of questions, just to make sure that you're covering all bases. So I highly recommend making a list of questions or needs that you have that you can take to your viewings, just to make sure you're not missing anything. So after you've done all of that and you want to start putting in offers, the process is quite fast, so you probably will be putting in an offer a couple days after you viewed somewhere. It's important to have a few things. You need to make sure that you are eligible to rent in the UK. So if you're a student, you need a guarantor. You're not going to be able to rent without a guarantor, and your guarantor needs to be earning a certain amount if you're not working yourself and earning that amount. So for example, a lot of the places in London that I was searching required the guarantor to earn at least like 3 times more than the rent monthly. So for example, for somewhere that's £1,200 a month, your guarantor or yourself needs to earn at least £40,000 a year. So if you're not a student and you're working full time, that needs to basically be your salary, just to make sure that you can meet the affordability criteria. And if you're unsure about what a guarantor is, it's basically someone who is in charge of covering your rent in the event that you don't manage to pay. But obviously in some circumstances this isn't possible. For example, you're self-employed or you're between jobs or something like that. You also have the option to pay 6 months rent up front, and other factors might also mean that you have to take this option. So that's around like £6,000 up front. Those are all the different kind of options. I'm sure there's more, so definitely do your own research too. But yeah, after you've gone through all those checks, hopefully you get accepted and your application is approved, and all you have to do is pay your deposit, pay your first month's rent and move in. And as I mentioned earlier, the process of moving into a new place is an expensive process just because of moving costs if you live far away and you're driving, petrol costs back and forth. The first month is not an accurate representation of how much you're going to be paying on a monthly basis, but it is important to account for all of these extra costs. So yeah, that's basically the whole process from start to finish. Okay, so before I end this video, how to decorate and make use of a small space. Generally, the spaces you're going to be working with aren't going to be that huge, just because that's just how it is in London, I guess. Like, you just live in small spaces unless you're living further out. I feel like I'm going to talk about this more in my fully furnished apartment tour. You'll see all my tips and tricks, so stay tuned for that. Try to get a lot of things that you can fold away. My sofa, for example, has storage. It's also a sofa bed, which no one knew that yet. I was gonna wait until the apartment tour. It's like one of the classic TikTok couches. Getting small stuff like shoe racks or a kitchen trolley or hooks to hang my pots in the kitchen, that sort of stuff. But as I said, I'll go into more detail in a different video. Oh, and I forgot to say, it helps to have a place that's already furnished so that you don't have to buy furniture. So I definitely recommend doing that, especially if you're not intending to rent long term like me. I'm trying to rent for the shortest period of time possible, but obviously if you're looking to rent for a longer period of time, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I hope this video has helped. I hope you guys found it interesting. It's not my usual sort of content, but I want to make more house related content, and in the future I'd love to make more property related content once I buy somewhere. But yeah, let me know your thoughts down below. If you have any more questions, also let me know in the comments down below and I'll do my best to answer them or direct you somewhere that I think is useful. If you did enjoy, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on so you don't miss any videos. All my social media links will be in the description below also. Feel free to follow me. But yeah, thanks again for watching. I'm gonna go now, but I'll see you next time. So bye.